Radio Network 105.3 FM from the beautiful city of New Orleans. We are fully sponsored by the amazing people over at Folgers Coffee. We love you muchly, really muchly. So thank you, thank you. Big thank you to Dr. Snick, aka Justin Snicker, for his contribution of time and music to the show for our intro and outro. He is an award-winning composer of Halloween horror, sci-fi, and dark wave electronic music, which can be found just about anywhere you can find good tunes. Sample, Spotify, iTunes, Bandcamp, Amazon, ... And we go on and on and on. Tonight, we welcome for the very first time here in the Outer Realm, Peter Muise, and he's going to be discussing folklore, traditions, witches, and such of New England. So that's going to be a whole lot of fun. But in order to participate tonight, you're going to have to hit some of our. I'm just going to come in here and try to put it in right now, because you're going to have to hit these following. Here we go. There we go. So we've got, it's already people on chat. We're on
hello,
Twitch,
hello.
UFO Paranormal, Facebook, Canada's Most Haunted, News on the Flip Side. We've got Outer Realm, of course. We've got Joe Montaldo under UFO Undercover. We've got UFO Paranormal. We've got International Public Radio on YouTube. And of course, we've got UFO Paranormal on YouTube. So I see we're already filling up. Wayne, Steve, hello, Tamara, hello, Zach Man, geez, filling up pretty good. So
I think I have my earbuds in backwards.
Oh, that works. We're off to a good start when your earbuds are in backwards. Is it Monday? No, I don't think so. So he could not get it to load on UFO Paranormal. Wayne, sorry. Hit International Public Radio. I'm guessing that's where you are, because here you are. So I see our guest is already waiting. God, I love that. Right on time. Yeah, I see it. Perfect. So do you want to do a brief bio? Are you ready? I can't hear you, Bubbles. I can't hear you. You're muted. I don't know. Okay, I'm going to try this.
Oh, I am so sorry.
Somebody's having a sleepy day.
Microphones need no wire.
Wireless.
So I'm on what I loathe the most, the earbuds, pods, whatever they are, those Apple things.
Okay, so yeah, because you're kind of going.
Please forgive me, because I have small ears, so they fall out, and I'm not impressed. I'm hoping I even paid extra to get my wire here tomorrow. But anyways, with that said, I'm looking forward to tonight. He is an author, explorer, researcher with a degree in anthropology. Our guest has been exploring New England, legends, folklore, and weird traditions for 20 years now. His work has recently appeared in Sam Baltrusis' 13 Most Haunted Crime Scenes Beyond Boston, and he has appeared as a guest expert on the Travel Channel's Mystery at the Museum. I love that show. Author of Legends and Lore of the North Shore, please welcome Peter Muise to the show. Hello, how are you? I'm so sorry.
Good. Do I sound okay?
You sound great.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
I'm the mess. You're doing great.
I agree, though. Like, my ears are not the right shape for earbuds and earpods either, so I'm always like pushing them back in with my fingers and stuff like that.
I'm not used to wearing these. That's the problem. They're new to me today.
And whenever you move, they cut in and out, so you almost have
because I'm probably doing this to the microphone.
You're cutting the signals or whatever. Yeah.
I'm not gonna move. I'm just gonna sit here.
Yes, Tamara says she feels your earbud pain.
Thank you. I think a lot of people do. They fit well, but I'm not used to them. And if I move the wrong way, they're just going to, I don't know how people work out in these things. But anyways.
Yeah, because you sound good when you're just,
Yeah, as long as I don't move. That's great.
Pretty much.
Fidgety squirrel has the earbuds. That's great.
Our squirrel can't move tonight. No. So, Peter, how are you?
I'm good. Excited to be here to talk about things I've written, things I've seen, whatever weird topics you want to bring up. I am ready. I'm excited.
Oh, I love it. No, you've got, a whole array of things to talk about. So it's just like, we don't get it all in one show. We'll have to bring you back. So, so I guess where I always start is humble beginnings. Usually when people sort of get into this field, it's because they've had an experience or a sighting or at least, an interest. What brought you to where you are today?
Sure. I mean, that's a great question.
Thank you.
I grew up, I was born in the late 60s, grew up in the 70s. So as a kid in the 1970s, I was exposed to lots of weird phenomena through the media, right? So things like UFOs, Bigfoot, the Bermuda Triangle, those topics started to become really popular in the 70s. And so I was the right age to be like, ooh, all this stuff is out there, right? I remember going to see like In Search of Noah's Ark, the movie, with my parents.
Okay, it's back because I saw that too.
Yes, right. We're dating ourselves.
I never even heard of it. Really?
It was not a good movie. I will say it was not a good movie.
That's probably why I haven't heard of it. Okay. Not
like,
because I'm younger.
Bigfoot showed up on the TV show The $6 Million Man. There was even like a Bigfoot Saturday morning
I know.
TV show,
Everybody's
right?
cashing in on him.
Right. And
Bigfoot showed up on the $6 Million Man. Peter, are you serious?
He was a bionic alien robot, it turned out. Bigfoot was a bionic alien
Great
robot.
twist.
Yeah.
Great
Surprise.
twist.
Right?
That would be why my brothers watch that show.
Yeah.
They're Bigfoot fanatics. Okay.
Yeah. And so I too had an older brother. And so I was interested in this stuff, but he is 3 years older than me. So he was more interested in this even than I was at the time. And so I kind of was like following some of the things he was interested in. So like he was really big on Bigfoot and UFOs. So those sort of his big interests, I think. So
cool.
Like I grew up in that time and was sort of absorbing that sort of stuff. At the same time, I was also kind of a nerdy kid who liked, mythology and folklore and things like that. So my parents bought me books about Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Norse mythology, all those sorts of things, King Arthur, all of that. So I had kind of the two streams. I had like the paranormal stuff, and I had sort of, classical mythology and world folklore.
Right.
And really when I went to college, I got a couple of degrees in anthropology and studied more folklore and even like looked at some of the paranormal stuff that way. And finally, when I got out of college, I was probably in my late 20s, early 30s or something, I realized that I did not know a lot about kind of the folklore of Massachusetts and New England, where I've lived my whole life.
Right.
And so I started to explore like local legends, local folklore, and I've just been doing that for the last, I don't know, long time, 20-something years. And it's really, there's a lot to just explore, and there's always something new popping up. So I think it's been really interesting for me to like kind of delve into the place where I've lived my whole life. It's really helped me feel grounded too in this area.
There's so much that's going on that coast. Sorry, Michelle.
No, that's okay. Yeah. Oh, hello, Jade. Nice that you tapped in. This is great. Zachman says Bigfoot has quite a. Why don't we just put it up? Let's see it. There you go. Can you even see that, Amelia?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, Bigfoot has quite a filmography, just like being the world's greatest social disaster. The elusive Bigfoot. Yes. Well,
everybody knows, I think, Massachusetts, and for this sort of thing, for Salem, of course, right? That's the big one. But you've got a lot more information. There's a lot more.
Definitely. I mean, I just published a book on September 1st, Witches and Warlocks of Massachusetts, which is just about witches and warlocks of Massachusetts. Can I hold up a copy?
Yes,
there it is. Available wherever you buy books online.
Turn it this way.
Yeah, just to get off this. There we
go.
Now there's no
right up to the camera.
Yeah,
right up to the camera.
Right. Doing my best. Right.
Beautiful cover, Peter. I love it.
Available on Kindle, whatever you.
Well, why don't we start with that if you want?
Yeah, sure. So as you say, like everyone knows about the Salem witch trials for obvious reasons, right? It's like 150 people are accused of being witches, 19 people are executed, one man is killed while being tortured, right? It was like a huge political, social disaster, right? 1692 that happened. But there were a good 50 years of witchcraft beliefs and trials before that. There actually were 50 trials involving witchcraft in Massachusetts before the Salem trials even happened. So there were 50 of them, starting. Puritans landed here, let's say 1620 in Plymouth, then they settled other places, Salem 1626, Boston 1630, things like that. So in 1641, they passed a law saying, which I'm going to try to paraphrase it, something like, if any man or woman be a witch, that is hath a familiar spirit, they shall be put to death.
Wow.
So that's 1641. They passed this law like witchcraft is a capital crime. If you're found guilty of being a witch, you will be executed.
Wow.
So then the
Wow.
first person executed as a witch was in Massachusetts, was executed in 1648. She was a woman named Margaret Jones who lived in Charlestown, Massachusetts, which is kind of a neighborhood now of Boston. She had moved here with her husband, and she worked as a healer, like an herbal healer. And so she was particularly effective. Like people testified at her trial, like, oh yeah, her cures were great. Like she could cure us really quickly, really easily. And people were sort of puzzled that she was so effective because her cures were really simple. And they have records of things like she would, grind up anise seed and mix it with wine. And now she would give that as a medicine and it would heal people. And so she was really effective. So people were kind of like, how can she be so effective at healing people? Is this perhaps witchcraft, right?
Of course.
Of course. It couldn't just be that she knows medicine, right? It must be witchcraft.
Of course.
So, and some people also would testify that she would say things like, if you don't take my medicine, you're going to get sicker. And then surprise, they would get sicker. And they were like, oh, she put a curse on me just so I would have to buy her medicine.
Right.
Which is, of course, ridiculous. She was just diagnosing
So then the tattlers came out.
Yes.
Right.
My gosh.
And so she was executed in 1648 as a witch. This sort of gossip and people wondering how she was so effective was taken as, real testimony. And some people said that she had a familiar spirit. And I don't know if everyone knows what a familiar spirit is, but
yeah, but why not, but explain it for the listeners.
It's sort of this belief that, and I'll say that I'm talking about sort of a Puritan perspective here.
Of course.
The devil would give witches sort of a small imp or a small demon to do their bidding.
Right.
And so these familiar spirits supposedly could take different forms, like an animal or sort of a small monster, like you hear about birds with human heads or small monkey-like creatures. And in the case of Margaret Jones, supposedly her familiar spirit showed up as a small child. And so when she was in prison, the jailer said that he saw a small child manifest, sort of just appear inside her jail cell.
Right.
And sort of whispered to her, and then it disappeared, right? And other people said, oh, we saw a small child too. We think it was the demon that served Margaret Jones. So she was the first person in Massachusetts executed as a witch.
Wow.
I do want to clarify, I guess, just as I talk about witches, like I'm using like an older definition of witch, because plenty of people now are witches who like practice, magic. They read tarot cards. They celebrate the seasons. They, might cast a magic circle. Like that's valid. That is that's a valid definition of witch. But when I'm talking about witches, I'm talking sort of an older definition that you would have seen in the 1600s through like the 1800s, sort of like someone who uses magic to hurt people. So I'm not talking about your friendly neighborhood tarot card reader or the nice Wiccans who live down the road from you, right? Those are
because I'm sure there's a lot of them listening.
Right, exactly. Yes, right.
Yes.
Or holistic healer.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, people get condemned all the way, even here on this side of the world. Like, when I say this side of the world, we're up north in Canada. So, but I remember a lot of tales because my great grandmother was allegedly a healer in her village, and cures for cancer, everything. And the family even had sent it into local papers of the time after her passing, and they just disappeared. So, yeah. So, I think it was a really big thing. You just come over to the New World because they came from, Spain, France, and Portugal, and they had all of these, cures and family remedies. I mean, I use old family remedies even now. Don't beat down my door.
But we're not shunned by the Catholic Church when we do it.
Yeah. No, not so much anymore. They just get you on other things. So,
It's interesting. There were, quite a few women kind of in that Puritan era in Massachusetts. We're talking like the, 1600s.
They were hardcore.
They were hardcore. The Puritans were hardcore people, right?
Yeah.
And so there were some other women who worked as healers who were accused of being witches as well. And some people say it's because maybe there was this almost rivalry with male doctors, right? So maybe the male doctor's like, oh, I have to get this competition out of the way, right? How do I get this competition out of the way?
Mhm.
So maybe you
Wow.
start the whisper campaign that, well, maybe she's a witch, maybe her cures aren't that,
Right.
That's a great point. I never thought of that perspective. You always think of the perspective of the taking of the land, but never did I think that's excellent. Tell us more.
There was even a man accused during the Salem witch trials named Roger Toothaker,
Mhm.
who also he worked as an unofficial healer, and so he also said he could diagnose and help people battle evil magic. Right. So there's a man named Roger Toothaker who lived in North Andover, Massachusetts, and he found himself accused of being a witch also by a physician. A
Wow.
doctor who sort of saw him as like a rival for customers said, oh, Roger Toothaker is clearly a witch.
Right.
And Roger
Figured.
Toothaker was not arrested. He died before he could be, formally
Right.
executed or anything like that. But yeah, so it's an
Yeah.
interesting thing. And a lot of the people, I mean, there were 5 women executed as witches before the Salem trials even happened in Massachusetts.
Hmm.
And so often, we have decent records of 4 of them. One of them is a little murky about exactly what happened at her trial, but for 4 of them, they were women who were going outside sort of the social norms a little bit, or sometimes a lot. So
Which
you
would have
have
been dangerous in those times.
very dangerous. There was a woman named Alice Lake who lived in Dorchester, Massachusetts, and we have some records of her trial, but not a lot of them. But what the records focus on is that, she tried to give herself an abortion and that she had sex before marriage, right?
Oh, of course.
And she had a child out of wedlock.
Scarlet Letter.
Right. And so that's what the records don't talk much about, like she cast a spell or she was in league with Satan. They're more about like, oh, she tried to give herself an abortion and she had a child out of wedlock.
Right.
And so like that was sort of
All it
enough
took.
to like, tip the scales against her, right? If she would do those things, then clearly she would be in league with the devil, There was a wealthy woman in Boston named Anne Hibbins, and I don't know if in Canada do they make you read the Scarlet Letter in school? I don't know, but in the U.S. most people have to read.
I've been to Salem. I've been to the Hawthorne House. I've been to all of it. Yeah.
Okay, so
But yeah, you do read the Scarlet Letter. They actually made a movie too.
Yes, right.
Yep.
So Anne Hibbins is a character in the Scarlet Letter. She's sort of an older woman who tries to like lure Hester Prynne into the ways of witchcraft.
Right.
But she was based on a real person. And she she came to Massachusetts from England with her husband. They were quite wealthy. They were well connected politically with the Massachusetts Puritans. Her husband served in like the legislature. But Anne Hibbins herself had a reputation for being very argumentative. And so again, for her trial, we don't see there's not any records about how she cursed people or how she was in league with Satan, but all the records are about how she was argumentative and how she like hired a carpenter to work on her house and thought he overcharged her and she argued with him. And then she wouldn't listen to her husband when her husband said, stop arguing and things like this. And so she was actually excommunicated from her church for being so argumentative.
Wow.
Right? She refused to apologize. She would not step down. When her husband died, she was quickly accused of being a witch and executed, basically because she was argumentative and unpopular. And people, even at the time, wrote and said, she's just being executed because she's wealthy and she's unpopular. And this is sort of to appease the kind of people of Boston.
Because she would be no longer under the protection of her husband.
Right. There was no one to
fair game.
Intervene. Yeah.
She
had a lot of property also, which was sort of, distributed among other people and things like that. So you see a lot of that. People who were kind of outside, women in particular, outside the social norms, getting accused of being witches.
Mm-hmm.
That was common. And there was one who was pregnant. So the husband was put in her place, right? To be hung.
Oh, yeah. John
or
Proctor.
Two. Was there one or two?
John Proctor and Elizabeth Proctor in the Salem witch trials, they were both accused of being witches. And John Proctor, in particular, he thought all the Salem witch trials were a bunch of, can I say the word crap? Were a bunch
Yeah.
of crap. I was on something the other day, they wouldn't let me say
You just
crap.
can't F-bomb, that's
I
all.
won't F-bomb. He was like, he lived in Salem Village, and he said, these trials are a sham. One of a servant girl who worked for his family said that she was bewitched, and she started to accuse people of being witches. And he said, no, that's not true. Snap out of it. And she recanted. She's like, oh, I was lying. And John Proctor said, look, everybody, like, these trials are a sham. So, of course, he was then accused of being a witch, as was his wife, Elizabeth.
Wow.
He was hanged for being a witch, but his wife was spared because she was pregnant. So they were going to hang her after she gave birth. But the trials were shut down by that point. So she was spared.
But she lucked out.
She lucked out. But her
A
husband
single
was
mom. Yeah, looked out.
And if you ever read The Crucible, if I've seen The Crucible, John Proctor is kind of the main character in The Crucible. They kind of sex his story up a little bit. They make him having an affair with somebody and all this. That didn't happen.
Right.
But they had to add a little dramatic interest to the story.
Of course, it wouldn't. Yeah, it
Wouldn't
wouldn't
be-
have been interesting otherwise. I'm sure.
Wouldn't be
I
Hollywood
always
without
find
it.
like the real stories to be so much more interesting, than all these movies and made for television nonsense. And you end up finding out the real history, and you can't believe how far off some of it veers from the
Some of
truth.
it is pretty
And you wonder
shocking
why
and pretty
people get
weird.
confused. Like,
Right. I guess at least the TV, at least people are aware that there were Salem witch trials and things like that. So that's something, right?
yeah,
And I think
a
that's
lot of
one good thing
people.
about pop culture.
No, exactly. I think people have a lot of misinformation about that, because there have been so many films made on these witch trials. Let's face it. In your opinion, do you find the tourism? Do you find it still very like there seems to be an interest that just won't die with it? Like people are always interested and they keep coming back. A lot of the repeat people.
Right. Yeah. I love to go to Salem.
Yeah.
I didn't go this year because of COVID,
Yeah.
but usually my husband and my friends and I, we go up there in October, not right on Halloween day, but around Halloween. And it's just like,
Yeah.
it's a carnival, right? It is a carnival.
Right.
And that's, some people will say, oh, they're making light of these people who died because it's so carnivalesque and it's entertaining, it's fun. On the other hand, I can also see, you could think that the city that executed these people as witches is now a place that celebrates witches. And so is it just the pendulum has swung the other way and they're almost doing penance perhaps for what happened 300 years ago, right? Now this town executed 19 innocent people for witchcraft, and now they're celebrating witchcraft. And it's interesting.
Yes.
Like if you go up there, it's a big mixed crowd, but you see a lot of women dressed as witches, right? Kind of celebrating that archetype almost of like the witch. They all have the witch hat and they wear black.
Yeah.
And so you can also say like, it's a way of people reclaiming their power, I think. And I don't know, Salem has been a tourist hotspot for witchcraft since like the 1800s. It's not a new thing.
No. But the fact is, it's got staying power.
It's got staying power.
Think about it, 1800s. We're like, we're 2022. Like,
right.
That's amazing. Here's a comment for you, Amelia. Can you see that one?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay.
Steve White. Hi, Steve.
Yes.
One of the judges supposedly during the witch trials was against all of the false accusations that were occurring and offered a safe place on his land for some of the accused to hide. What's later on became known as the Salem Witch Caves in Framingham, Massachusetts.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've been to the witch caves, and they're located if you go. There's a road in Framingham called Salem End Road, and so basically after the Salem witch trials ended, a lot of people in Salem didn't want to stay there, right? Their family members had been executed. Their neighbors had falsely accused them. And so a lot of people wanted to get out of town. So it was a member of the legislature. I don't know if it was a judge, it was like a lieutenant governor or somebody like that, who said, I have land out here in Framingham. So he opened it up to people from Salem. And so they followed this trail from Salem to Framingham. And that's called Salem End Road.
Right.
And supposedly when they got there, they didn't have anywhere to live. So there are these small caves there. And so supposedly the people who were refugees from Salem basically lived in these caves. And those are called the witch caves. I went to see, and they're very small and they're filled up with a lot of debris. So I didn't really go inside. Like, I took pictures from the outside, but I was like, I'm not going to risk my life in those caves. But.
No.
I never got to see them.
It's in the middle of a big park out in Framingham and Ashland, which is sort of west of Boston, west of Salem.
Yeah.
Right. So if people head out that way, what do you recommend? That's not such a, like, I hate to use the word tourist trap, because I do love to see communities or places, attract tourism, because, you need it. But you do fall into some, like I was in Romania. I freaking love Romania, but a lot of the little towns I went to, it really is just a lot of, cheesy stuff that took away from, the history of everything. Is there any place that you recommend that people should see?
Well,
What is the must see?
I think if you go to Salem, and Salem is fun, like there's all the occult shops, the Wiccan shops, there's bars, all that stuff. But also there are some things actually with like deep history, like real history. There is the House of Seven Gables, right, which was Nathaniel Hawthorne's cousin's house, and he wrote the famous novel about it. And that really kicked off witchcraft tourism in Salem. So he published that in like 1850 something. And it was a huge bestseller in the US. And so people started to come to see the house and the other things. So that's an amazing house.
Right.
There's what's called the Witch House, also in Salem, which is incredibly old. It's from, I've heard, maybe as early as 1635, right?
Wow.
And everyone says it's haunted, right?
It's very haunted. You can feel it from the outside.
That was owned by one of the judges in the Salem witch trials. Jonathan Corwin owned that house. And so you can tour the house, and like, it's amazing. You're in a building from 1635 with direct connections to the Salem witch trials. Yeah. And so also there's like the Charter Street burying ground in Salem is just an incredibly old cemetery. So there are if you can do the fun kind of Halloween-y or the fun occult Wiccan stuff, but also there is like this historical layer that you can see, right? You can, if you wanted, you can go to Proctor's Ledge, which the place where they actually hang the witches, if you wanted to go someplace a little more somber, right?
Yeah.
Which is sort of outside the center of town, so like behind an Osco drug or something like that.
The first thing I did was go straight to the memorial. That was the first thing I did. The first time I used to go to Boston it was like a girls' trip with one of my friends. And I love the city. I love the state. I really think I was born in the wrong country, because I always feel when I'm in Boston, I feel like I was there many moons ago. But the memorial, if you could tell our audience a little bit about that, is extraordinary. The threshold is the most beautiful.
Right. It's right outside the Charter Street burying ground. It is sort of like just very simple, very understated, the names of the people who were executed. People leave flowers, people leave candles. So there is like the serious side, the historical side. So along with the more touristy side. So maybe trade back and forth if you go up there and do a little bit of both, I guess.
And of course, it is a hotspot, Salem, for paranormal activity and research and conventions and such. A lot of colleagues head up there. So what are your thoughts on mixing? Because it's such a tragic place when you think about the loss of life.
Yes.
And when people are coming in and looking to make communication, I think, you feel so bad for these souls. You'd like to think that they're just moved on and that they're not being poked and prodded in the afterlife. And I'm a researcher, so I say it very honestly. Right.
Yeah.
Not trying to poke fun at anybody or
no, it's an interesting question, right? And I will say that So I'm kind of a conditional skeptic, right? Like
Right.
here in my condo or in the middle of the day, like I'm a skeptic. Like I don't believe in ghosts or Bigfoot or things like that. But then if it's late at night and I'm in the woods, I'm like, oh yeah, I believe, right?
Right.
Or something like that. If
I
you put
believe
me in a
anything
haunted,
right now.
so I always do my explorations during the daytime, right?
Right.
You know, there are different ways to think about that sort of stuff. I mean, is it an actual soul there? Is it some sort of just
Residual
energy some people talk about? And I often think, as someone like from my skeptical mindset, like a ghost story or a ghost encounter is a way of people also remembering the past. Right? People having like this direct encounter with something that happened in that spot in the past. So if you go to Salem and you encounter a ghost, whatever that ghost is, like that's a way of you actually having a direct encounter with the past, I think. You know?
I agree. I'm going to put up a couple of comments. One is a question, one is a comment. Amelia. Just for those our audio people who aren't on.
Yeah, that's a good question about Danvers, Massachusetts.
Yeah, go ahead, Amelia.
Oh, okay. No,
for the listeners, not viewers.
Steve White is asking, just curious about Danvers, Massachusetts. Did any of the executions from the accused ever take place in Danvers, which was back then, I think, was known as Salem Village? Just curious. Great question.
That's a good question. So if you go to Salem today, it's a pretty discreet city, right? It's like a city by the ocean. But in the 1600s, Salem was much larger. It was just a much bigger place, and it encompassed much more land mass. And so the Salem witch craze basically started in part of Salem called Salem Village, which was maybe, I think, like, I don't know, maybe 8 miles from Salem town on the coast. So it was like a farming part of Salem, more inland. And it was like a community of maybe 90 families, 90 households, with a lot of political infighting and like a certain dominant family called the Putnams who wanted to control everybody, and other people didn't want to be controlled by them, like this back and forth.
Politics, right? Yeah.
And so that's where the witch craze basically started, at the home of Samuel Parris, who was the minister in Salem Village. It was under the jurisdiction of Salem in general. You know, people were executed in Salem town itself, down by the coast. So, and now, like, there are various towns like Peabody, Danvers, some other places that were part of Salem, but they broke away at different times just to have, you know, their own independence. So basically, Danvers used to be part of Salem. That was Salem Village. That's where things started. But a lot of it also happened in Salem town itself, which is now modern Salem.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Amelia, I'll put up another one for you.
Okay, I just heard Peter say Peabody, and I remember when I was small, this is silly, but when I was small, I didn't understand what they were, because for us, when you read that written, it's Peabody.
Right.
So they're making fun of me because I'm like, we're in Peabody, and they're like, no, we're in Peabody, and I'm like, we're in Peabody, and we need to. We were trying to get to Fall. We were trying to get to Fall Rivers, and everything. And they speak really fast.
Freaking Canadians.
But they speak very fast there. I've been all over Massachusetts. But anyways, I love the word Peabody. It stays with me because of that. Yeah, and I'm like, no, it's Peabody, isn't it? Am I saying it wrong?
Too many cartoons.
I was so embarrassed. Okay, hi Bradley. Bradley Monk says all over Europe is where I would go to study of understanding of witchcraft, dating back hundreds of years. I think for the history of witchcraft started in Salem was from Europe. Yeah,
I believe that.
Well, absolutely.
I think that's true. The Puritans who settled in Massachusetts and in Connecticut and other parts of New England, most of them came from a place in England called East Anglia, which is kind of a region of England. And East Anglia had the biggest witch trials in England.
There we go.
And so there was a lot of witchcraft belief in East Anglia. They didn't have like beliefs in fairies so much, or other sorts of, you know, nicer folklore, but a lot of witchcraft belief, a lot of belief in the devil. And so the Puritans from East Anglia came to Massachusetts and brought those same beliefs with them.
Which is makes the most sense for, I think a lot of folklore comes from, the people who immigrated to the New World, and
Right.
that comes with you,
Right.
so which is what I find fascinating, because you hear stories of werewolves and things like that called different things throughout, let's say, New Orleans, and what we call them up here in Canada, and because we stream out of New Orleans, and when I'm in Romania, I'm in a town called Brasov, and every full moon, werewolves are supposed to come down from the mountains into the courtyard, and I'm just like, I'm just waiting for it. But I love the folklore, how it just moves around the world.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
And then it
everywhere.
changes, right, and merges
Yeah,
with other things and becomes its own unique
yeah. I think
thing
it's
too, right?
great though,
Yeah.
So okay, so lead us through. You've got so much like folklore and traditions, and oh, hold on, we got one more question. One more, one more.
I like a
Okay,
question.
Okay, Dave Petrella. Hi, Dave. Hi,
Dave.
Peter. I'd like to ask what your beliefs are about the Bridgewater
Oh,
Triangle.
sure. Okay, so for people who are not from Massachusetts, I'll explain what the Bridgewater Triangle is in case people don't know. And so the Bridgewater Triangle is an area in southeastern Massachusetts. It encompasses multiple towns. It's a roughly triangular shape. And in the center of this area, the Bridgewater Triangle, is an enormous swamp called the Hockomock Swamp, which is a great name. And it's believed to mean something like place of spirits from the Algonquin language. And so in that area within the Bridgewater Triangle, all these different towns, this giant swamp, and there's been a lot of paranormal reports that come out of there. So UFOs, of course, Bigfoot, giant cats,
right.
giant snakes, giant flying humanoid things, ghosts,
Wow. Full gambit.
puckwudgies, what they call puckwudgies,
Yes.
which are like a kind
Yes.
of Massachusetts, kind of indigenous.
It almost sounds like something
fairy
you do to
beings.
one of your hockey teammates.
Right. It's like a fun word to say, puckwudgie.
Sorry.
But they're sort of supposed to be these small, kind of hairy,
Yes.
magical humanoids who live out in the woods and things like that. So all
Right.
these things have been cited in the Bridgewater Triangle.
Right.
And it's kind of, the name obviously is like a play on the Bermuda Triangle.
Right.
And so
Yes.
it's an area where there's a lot of paranormal reports, and people often wonder, like, why so many reports? Is it like a portal to another dimension has come up, right?
Mhm.
Or, was there, I think they were like, the Puritans massacred Native Americans in the area. So was that some sort of like horrible residual bad energy that came up, or whatever? Different beliefs about what it could cause this kind of paranormal phenomena there. So I don't really know myself. I've been through it. We actually drove through it at night once to go to a friend's birthday party in Raynham, Massachusetts, which is in the Triangle. I just remember going down this road. It's pitch dark on both sides, and like there literally was like horror movie fog, like blowing across the road. I'm like, okay, this is a creepy place.
This is good, and yet you're still here.
I'm still here.
I know. You didn't get sucked into a portal.
No, luckily, So that's the Bridgewater Triangle. And then we've gone to a few other places there, like Anawan Rock, which is a haunted rock down in that area also.
Mhm.
So.
Well, the triangles are said to be, potentially have portals and places where they have underwater bases, and for UFOs, and because I mean there's like, or they have the vortices that go through. I mean, they've got like apparently 7 vortices throughout the planet that are pretty powerful. But the triangles, of course, fall in a lot of the same areas. We have our own up here near Lake Ontario. I know.
What's it called?
Yes, we have one. It's the Lake Ontario. It's the Lake Ontario Triangle, and we have our own, our own sea monster, and there are allegedly underwater bases up in Lake Ontario, and Lake Michigan has the Michigan Triangle, and there's all kinds of UFO sightings there. So it's funny that you say that the Bridgewater Triangle also has sightings of UFOs over it. Just makes you wonder, are things attracted to the energy, or do they simply come in and out of the water?
Right. Often it is a watery place, right, that has this kind of energy. I had a friend who grew up in Taunton, Massachusetts, which was in the Bridgewater Triangle.
Oh,
like
Jesus.
I think his mother maybe had seen a UFO. And his
Right.
grandmother used to say, like, "Oh, don't go picking blueberries in the swamp. Like, just don't go in the swamp to pick blueberries." Which
What
is
a
also
place.
practical advice too, right? You don't want
Sure.
your grandson to fall in the swamp and
No,
get
for
bitten by a
sure. What a
snake.
place to have to grow up, though. It's like growing up right in the middle of Bermuda Triangle on an island. It's just like, I don't know, how functioning are you when you hear all those stories? How do you get through in society as a functional human being? I don't know. But okay, so continue on with, we just want to hear all about your work out there, folklore, traditions, sea
Sure. Sea
serpents.
serpents. I mean, I've been doing a lot of witch stuff for the last year or so, but
Yeah.
I'll take a break from witches, talk about some other
You
stuff
could
if you want.
anything you want. It's your show.
So I think one thing I'd say about the witches before we move on to other
Okay.
topics is
Yep.
that people associate witches with like Puritans in the 1600s, right? Like that was the
Yeah.
heyday. And definitely in Massachusetts, the Salem witch trials were the last trial,
Right.
right? When they had those trials, people kind of woke up and realized, like, oh my God, this is a mess. Like, how did we let this happen?
Yeah.
And people came away with it with the understanding that you can't prove witchcraft in court. You can't really prove the devil's influence in court. But they didn't stop believing in witches. Like people
Right.
still believed in witches. They just stopped having trials for
Right.
witches. And so you see, like in the 1700s, 1800s, 20th century even, still like witchcraft beliefs, witchcraft legends, things like that. Like I saw an account from 1923, which is pretty late, let's face it, from Chelsea, Massachusetts, which is a big industrial city right next to Boston, that a man in Chelsea, Massachusetts claimed he was bewitched. And contortions, writhing around, pain caused by an unseen assailant, all that stuff. And his family called in a physician, and the physician was like, I think this is just psychosomatic. Like, I don't think there's any real issue here. And his family's like, we want a second opinion. And so they found what they called a witch doctor. And, often I think when people say witch doctor, they think of like bad Hollywood movie from
Right.
the 40s or 50s with someone like with a shrunken head trying to cook you in a pot. And really, like in an older meaning of the word, a witch doctor is someone who treats witchcraft, right? Like you go to if you have a problem with your eye, you go to the eye doctor.
Right.
A problem with your foot, you go to the foot doctor. If you have a problem with a witch, you go to a witch doctor.
Right.
And so this man's family in Chelsea, Massachusetts, found somebody who was a witch doctor and said, oh, can you diagnose our son? The physician says that it's just psychosomatic or whatever, but we think it might be something more. And of course, the witch doctor's like, oh yeah, this is witchcraft. Like, what else would he diagnose? That's what he does.
Right.
And so he went to, he said, I can cure your son, and you just have to, he has to drink this potion that I will create. And so he created a potion out of 9 ingredients. The article I read did not list the first 8, but the last ingredient was grass from a graveyard. And so he kind of cooked up this potion and gave it to the man in Chelsea, which cured his witchcraft. And apparently, like a big crowd would gather outside this guy's house in Chelsea to kind of like see if they could see what was happening with this bewitched man. But that was 1923, which is pretty late, right? That's after World War I, right? So it's not the Puritan era anymore. And even still, there are legends about places haunted by witches. Like if you go to Salem, obviously, like the witch house is supposed to be haunted. Howard Street Cemetery, is supposed to be haunted by the ghost of Giles Corey. And people who don't know, like Giles Corey was accused of being a witch. He was like an 80-year-old farmer, supposedly mean as a snake, like not a nice person, but not a witch. And he was accused of being a witch. And his legal strategy was to not speak. He said, I'm not going to speak, right? So when he was put on the stand, the judge said, Giles Corey, how do you plead, innocent or guilty? He didn't say anything. And they asked him other questions, and he refused to speak. He would not say anything. And so there was a law in Massachusetts at that time that if someone refused to speak during a trial, they would be pressed, which meant that they would cover your body with heavy stones. And so the sheriff took Giles Corey, who's like 80 years old, to this field, and they staked him down to the ground. put a board on his chest and started to pile on heavy rocks. And they said, Giles Corey, do you have anything to say? And he wouldn't say anything. They put on more rocks. Giles Corey, do you have anything to say? He wouldn't say anything. Put on more rocks, and they could basically hear his rib cage cracking at this point.
Oh.
Giles Corey, do you have anything to say? And Giles Corey's only words were, more weight.
Wow.
That was it, more weight. So they put more weight on him and just killed him.
He knew that he wasn't going to win.
Yeah, he knew
Might
he
as well
wouldn't.
go out with them doubting.
Yeah, exactly. And he was concerned that they would take his property and things like that if he was found guilty. So he just let himself be killed during torture, basically. And so the field where he died is now a cemetery, the Howard Street Cemetery, which is just like in a neighborhood there in Salem, not far from the main drag. But supposedly his ghost haunts it. And supposedly his ghost has also appeared in Salem when there's going to be a disaster in town. For instance, there was a big fire in Salem. I want to say, I'm going to get the date wrong, like 1913 or 1919 or something like that. And people said they saw Giles Corey's ghost.
He's almost like Mothman.
Yeah, like he is an omen. Like if you see Giles Corey's ghost, that's not a good thing. Like you don't want to see him appearing in Salem. So there are those kind of witchcraft legends, I think, that linger on. Right. So there are lots of legends about places haunted by ghosts or haunted by the victims of the Salem witch trials, things like that, which kind of linger on,
It's fascinating because we look at people, these people who weren't witches, who are obviously, they were wrongfully put to death. So some of them may wander around for sure. Do you think that, I don't know if you've ever heard of a tulpa?
Sure, like a mental construct.
Yeah, like the Slender Man thing. Yeah, like that was manifested like in a chat room, like a game room sort of thing. And this being Slender Man, was manifested into this being that people were seeing all over the world, and they would give him characteristics and he would start exhibiting them. So my question, I guess, is, do you think that the same sort of thing happens in Salem? Because we have modern day witches for sure, and I'm sure there may have been some even back then, but so many of them were put to death, were indeed innocent and were healers, or do you think maybe that people just have such a strong belief in the fact that Salem is all about witches, and they get so wrapped up in the whole allure of it and the thoughts? Do you think maybe that some have been manifested maybe in spirit form, or in just, we don't know if they're spirit or not?
Well, that's an interesting idea, right? And I think, with my more skeptical hat, I would say even if they're not manifest in physical form, like the legend itself builds on itself, right?
Yeah.
Like one person says, "Oh, I think I saw the ghost of Giles Corey,"
right.
And then somebody else says, "Giles Corey's ghost is seen in that cemetery." And then I come along and I write a book and say, "Oh, if you go to the Howard Street Cemetery, you can see Giles Corey's ghost." Right. I say it on this show, and people are like, Giles Corey's ghost appears in Salem in the disaster.
Right.
Like, even in just that sense, like the legend builds and builds and builds. So whether there's sort of a metaphysical aspect of it, I don't know.
Or you could be conjuring them just by constantly talking about them.
I should probably zip my lips, right?
It's okay, you're not there. And just for the record, if you are looking for a place in Salem or in Boston that is not touristy, do not enter a cemetery. There are lineups in cemeteries in Boston and in Salem. They're just, even Fall River, it's just full.
I would say don't, or just go in the off season.
Go in the off season. Yeah. Here's another question, Bubbles. 1 second. There it is.
Yes, Zachman. Hi, Zach. Isn't the legend of sheriffs dying in Salem from heart attacks the reason why they moved the sheriff's office out of Salem?
That's a great story. So supposedly, it was a sheriff named George Corwin who presided over Giles Corey's death. And he was like Jonathan Corwin's cousin. So the Corwins are like a power family in Salem. And George Corwin, the sheriff of Salem, was supposed to be a really bad person. Like he was confiscating people's goods, although he wasn't legally supposed to do that. So he was just kind of like a greedy, bullying person. Supposedly he died of a heart attack at a very young age. and supposedly every sheriff after him of Salem died of a heart attack at a very young age.
Wow.
Right. And so they're almost, in a sense, replicating the death of Giles Corey, who's like heart cavity is crushed. Like they're all having their hearts basically implode or something like that as well. So the first of the sheriffs of Salem, then they become like the sheriffs of Essex, the whole county, Essex County, and the kind of curse supposedly goes on until finally they move the sheriff's office out of Salem to, I think, Medfield or someplace like that, and that ends the curse. And that story comes from a man named Robert Ellis Cahill, who had been a sheriff of Essex County and had a heart attack. And then he retired after that from being sheriff, and actually wrote folklore books. And so he tells that story himself, like that he was a victim of the curse, but now the curse has been broken because they've moved the sheriff's office out of Salem. So that is the legend. I don't know if it's true, but this man, Robert Ellis Cahill, said he experienced it himself. Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow. Newcomers. Hello, Sarah. Hello, Liz. Oh, gosh. Okay. This is good. I always like to acknowledge. Okay. So that's interesting. So basically, Salem is still this hotspot with a strong belief system. Is it all about witches, warlocks? Tell us.
I mean, that's the big draw in Salem, right?
It is, yeah.
Witchcraft and things like that. And I think I'm not a huge ghost hunter. Like I have friends who are ghost hunters who write books about ghosts. Yeah. And they will do the ghost tours. And I think there are other ghosts supposedly lurking around Salem, not just witches.
Right. Ooh, the Hawthorne House, especially.
Yeah, exactly, right? There are murder victims or just people overall. The specter moose. Okay, here's a question.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Wes. Wes Coleman asks, hi, everyone. Hi, Peter. Have you ever heard of the specter moose of Maine? And what's your view on it if you have? I've heard so much about it.
Specter moose. So it's a great name for us. Specter moose is kind of amazing. There's a variety of stories about the specter moose. And it's a large white moose that is seen in Maine, right? And some people just say, it's just like an albino moose, right? It's just an albino moose. So that's kind of the more mundane legend, right?
Yeah, we had one in our East Coast.
Yeah. Or some people say that it is a moose that has been, I think if moose get a lot of winter deer ticks on them, or winter ticks, they bleaches the color out of them also, right? So they say maybe that's just what caused the specter.
Oh, that's just gross.
It's gross, right? And sad.
That's just gross.
There are other stories about the specter moose that like it cannot be killed by a gun, right? It is super intelligent. I've even read a legend where the specter moose, like hunters are shooting at the specter moose and they can't kill it. And one of the hunters like drops his gun in fear. The specter moose somehow comes over, picks up the gun and shoots it at the hunter. Right? So there's like a range of legends, or like there's your super like mundane explanation, and there's like, wow, like this is not your ordinary natural being. It's like a supernatural avenging woodland monster, basically.
It depends on when these stories started, right? Because you have to look at some of them hundreds of years ago. They wouldn't know that albinos are, it's just a genetic mutation. They wouldn't understand that. We know that from over the years of medical studies. But I would imagine that in any country, even a person who is albino would be looked at as something negative or scary, because anything they didn't understand was just deemed demonic and Satan. And
and it's interesting. There's a story from North Andover, Massachusetts. There's a haunted location called Albino Road. And I've been to visit during the day. Like I only go to these places during the day, as I mentioned.
Of course, yeah.
And so it's kind of like
believe in you.
It's kind of this dirt road through the woods. It has a big like do not enter metal gate across it.
Right.
And according to the legend, in the 1600s, a Puritan family settled there and had their little farm or whatever as a husband and wife. And the wife gave birth to twin sons who were albino. And the husband and wife were like, oh, we love our children. We're afraid that our neighbors will judge them poorly. And so they told the two boys, like, whatever you do, don't go outside the house. Don't let the neighbors see you. And, people were very spread out then. So it wasn't like they were living on top of each other.
Right.
And so these boys grew up to be teenagers without ever being seen by anybody outside their family.
Wow.
Until one day, the father and mother are off into town, like going to the market or whatever. And the two boys are outside of the farmhouse, and a neighbor stops by and sees these two, very pale boys. And he is freaked out. Like, he didn't know that anybody, they had two sons, and plus they don't look like other people. So he's disturbed. He gets the constables. The constables come and arrest these two boys, bring them into the village center, and they say, okay, we think you may be some sort of demonic being, right? Because you don't look like us. And so they say, we're going to perform this test on you. And so they wrap the boys in heavy chains, and then they throw them into this pond, right? And so they say, I'm trying to think of how they phrase it in the legend, because it's a little different how it's normally phrased. They say that if you float, you are... I'm sorry. If you float, you are human, but if you sink, you're demons, or something like this, right?
Yeah.
And so they chain them up, they
on.
throw them in the pond, they sink, they drown. Like, oh, clearly they were demons.
Right.
Then they burn down the farm. Okay. And so supposedly now Albino Road in North Andover goes through the farmland where that farm used to be. And if you go there at night, you'll see these two pale, glowing figures who are very hostile to visitors. You don't want to go there at night and disturb them. There's no proof that story is true. Right. There's no record of two teenage boys being executed for being albinos. I don't think it happened, but it's interesting that it is a memory of Puritans and of kind of judgmentalness. And also so ties into the more modern concerns about fitting in, right? And prejudice and things like that.
Right.
So I think it's an interesting legend. Again, if you're talking about tulpas, who knows, maybe something actually is
oh, who knows?
Lurking in that road if people believe in it enough,
Yeah.
You can manifest it with your energy.
Yeah.
I find it heartbreaking, but that's where so much folklore comes from, or stories like this. You have a lot of folklore up there. You guys range anywhere from fairy folklore. You've got goatmen.
Yeah.
Goatman.
We have a few goatmen. We have a lot of
have
fairies.
them there also. Okay, yeah. I think the central United States also. I think New Orleans hasn't Joe mentioned something about a goatman at one point near New Orleans?
Probably.
Yeah,
everything's in New Orleans.
Everything's in New Orleans.
So
we don't have as many goatmen as other parts of the country have. Down south, I want to say, is it Virginia? There was Goatman Bridge or something like that, which is the Goatman.
Yes.
Wow.
In my reading and my research, I've found 3 goatman stories from New England. And so one is from Vermont, and it's I couldn't get a lot of detail about it, but basically people in a town in Vermont, there was a new housing development that went up in the 1960s. And after it went up, people in the housing development reported seeing this goat-like man looking in their windows at night. And it went on for a while, and then it just stopped. So kind of not a lot of detail, but sometimes that's even spookier. Just have these vague kind of and then a goat man looked in the window. That's kind of creepy. There was one I found actually on a Bigfoot research site. If you ever go to the BFRO, Bigfoot Research Organization, right, which has great reports. It's from the 1970s from Sandwich, Massachusetts, which is down on Cape Cod. And it was a December day in the 1970s. Teenage boy is home alone, watching TV. Saturday, afternoon, his parents are out doing chores or whatever, errands. So he's home by himself watching TV. So picture he's watching the TV straight ahead of him. And then above the TV is a window. So he's watching the TV, whatever's on, like horror movies, cartoons, whatever. And he's watching. Then he looks up and looks out the window, and he sees this face looking in the window at him. And it's sort of this hairy humanoid face. And the teenage boy like screams like, ah! And then the thing looking in the window screams, ah! And runs off, right?
Yeah.
And so
That's freaked out too. Oh.
yeah, and so
I'm dying.
so the boy, this teenage boy, calls his friends. He's like, "Did you pull a prank on me? Are you, you know?" And they're like, "No, obviously we didn't pull a prank because we're here answering our phones. Like we're not at your house, right? We didn't pull a prank on you." And so the boy is scared to leave his house until his friends come over, like ride their bikes over, whatever. So they all, get together for bravery, and they go out in the backyard to see like what they can see. And in the snow, they see footprints leading away from the living room window out into the trees, but they're cloven hoof prints. So you think they'll be like Bigfoot footprints, but they're these cloven hoof prints. So it's kind of.
I've heard so many stories about those. Sometimes it's goatmen. Sometimes it's people will say, "Oh no, it's a devil," or
the devil's not going to scream and run.
And,
Yeah. Devil's not going to scream and run in the window. He
but he's
startled
certainly not going to scream.
No,
A
probably
goat would
not.
scream. Have you ever heard a goat scream? They're terrifying. No.
Wes, I have to stop kidding around about the goat man. Wes is a correctional officer. Be careful about what you joke about, Wes.
He's probably not afraid of goatmen. The only other goatman story I came upon is from, I've only found it in one book called, I can't remember the name of the book at the moment, but it's supposedly from Cherryfield, Maine, which is a small town up in Maine. And in the 1950s, this man is driving his pickup truck through the woods outside Cherryfield, Maine. So Maine is very, very woodsy, right? He's driving his pickup truck down this road through the woods, a dirt road, listening to the radio. Driving, and suddenly the radio dies and the engine dies. And he's like, "Oh, this is weird. Like, why didn't my truck just suddenly shut off completely?" He gets out of the truck and he lifts up the hood to look at the engine, and the engine looks totally fine. He can't figure out what's wrong. And he kind of stands up, and as he is standing there, he sees somebody walk across the road. And, it's like a man. He's wearing a red flannel shirt. Since it's Maine, it's cold, like he's wearing a red flannel shirt. Then from the waist down, he has goat legs, hairy goat legs and hooves, and he has small horns.
Wow.
And so this goat man kind of walks into the road and looks at the man standing by his truck and kind of just smiles at the man like, creepy goat man smile.
Yeah.
And then walks across the road into the woods on the other side and disappears. And then as soon as the goat man disappears, the man's truck engine starts up and the radio starts up and everything's back to normal. And the guy just like jumps in his truck and like
did that just happen?
The heck out of there, right? Like,
Peter's probably the best person to bring to a bonfire.
Yeah.
You must be so much fun. You're
funny.
so much fun on air.
Thank you.
It's funny because characteristics that a lot of people have reported of UFOs, for example, right? The car just stops dead, stalls, won't start, radio stops, everything. Yeah. And then after the occurrence,
right, everything's back to normal. Yeah.
Yeah, makes you kind of wonder: is it an interdimensional being? Is it?
Yeah, it's a good story, right? It's creepy.
It's a great story. I like the similarity because there's a lot of beliefs in the paranormal and ufology and cryptozoology that some of these beings could just be interdimensional, to just come right through.
Yeah, just passing through, right? Yeah. There's supposedly the oldest UFO story in North America comes from Boston, Massachusetts. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if you guys know this one.
I've researched it. Yeah.
So it's like in the 1640s, two men are rowing a boat on the Muddy River, which is a little river here in Boston. It's like a couple miles from where I am right now. And they're rowing down this river. And in the sky above them, they see this strange glowing object. And it looks like a pig. It looks like other shapes also, like a pig, an arrow, various other things. And they kind of watch it like, oh, this is really strange, right? It's kind of a weird thing for us to be seeing in this boat. And then it disappears. And then they realize that after it disappeared, they have gone up the river against the tide several miles without rowing. Like, how did this happen? Like, how did we move up the river against the tide without rowing? And it's almost like a modern missing time story, right? Like,
It does.
something happened that they don't remember in there.
It does. And apparently a few days later, if it's the same case, because there's another one around the same time frame, it could be this one, but in a neighboring port or town, a couple of nights later, it happened again to people in that village. And I mean, they were very, very close together.
Yeah. It's the story about the people in the Muddy River shows up in the diary of John Winthrop, who was the governor of Massachusetts.
That one sounds right. Yeah.
And so he's like writing down, like, taxes, building wall around the town, shipping interest, giant glowing pigs seen in sky, treaty with the French, whatever. He's just
nonchalantly.
By the way, this happened, right? And it's kind of interesting because they had a very different worldview.
Now that you said that, because I didn't know that about him, I feel even better that I stopped at his grave, because I'm like, yeah, okay, so what? Now it's like, wait a minute. There's some supernatural connection here.
Yeah, he wrote 1644. He was writing about a supposed warlock who we called him a necromancer, who died in Boston Harbor. Wow. So a boat from Virginia came up to Boston with a crew of men on it. And that boat, when it left Boston, exploded in the harbor. Someone accidentally fired their pistol into the gunpowder store and blew the boat up, right? And so a lot of people died, and rescuers were able to pull most of the bodies out of the harbor, but one body was missing. They couldn't find one body. And that body they couldn't find was supposedly belonged to a man who had a reputation of being a necromancer. So being sort of a dark, evil magician, right? Practicing devilish arts. So they couldn't find his body, which everyone's like, where is the necromancer's body? A few nights later, people in Boston see glowing lights floating over the harbor. And at one point, they form the shape of a man. Like, these lights come out of the water and form the shape of a man. It's kind of roaming over the harbor. And then it disappears. And people are like, well, this is weird.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
A couple nights later, the lights appear again. They form the shape of a man roaming around. But then they hear a voice. People in Boston hear this voice saying, boy, come away, boy, come away. And so they see this shape floating around. They hear this ominous voice echoing out over the harbor. And people see this, multiple people report seeing this, right? John Winthrop says multiple godly people report seeing this.
Right.
And so
they were credible because
they were credible. Right. Credible because they were godly at the time.
Right.
And so John Winthrop seems to imply that it's like the devil has come to try to find that necromancer and drag him off to hell, basically. And so these lights are the devil kind of floating around looking for the body of his servant to bring him off to his unjust reward, I guess. And so people see that, and then the lights disappear after a certain point. So did the devil grab this guy and drag him off to hell, or whatever happened? But that's also from like the
so he was
diary.
Never found again, and they don't know if he got away.
Did he just get blown into tiny pieces? They couldn't find him, right?
Right. That's crazy. Okay, we'll put up another question.
Oh, Wes. Peter, what do you think about Rip Van Winkle, a legend based in fact?
Yeah, right. And that's a little outside my region. Like New York and New England are a little, but I know the legend, right, from Washington Irving's story, the legend of Rip Van Winkle, and he parties with the dwarves, right?
Yes.
And it falls asleep for many, many years. I don't know. It's like interesting. Like so many of these legends have themes that repeat throughout culture. So again, we've got the time issue. We have sort of the magical sleeper, which often you see in other places like people say like King Arthur is still sleeping,
Yeah.
right, under a hill in England, or
Mm-hmm.
other national heroes sometimes said to be sleeping in countries that will rise
Like
up.
the Sleeping Beauty thing that's
Yeah,
based
right.
on legends. I mean,
Right.
not that she is, but I think they would have projected that around old Arthurian legends.
Yeah. And so I don't know. It's and you read like there is fairy folklore
Yeah.
in North America, right? It's a little different than the
Yes.
European fairy folklore, but it's there. And so
Right.
there is this belief that there are kind of these usually small magical beings living out in the woods or in the hills or the mountains, and you don't want to get on their bad side because they are kind of morally neutral, let's say, right? Or morally
I
ambivalent.
like that. Morally neutral.
Kind of
Right.
sounds like me.
Right.
Yeah. I was gonna say,
I'm little, I'm magical.
Are you morally neutral though, Amelia?
I am more. It's just us.
yeah, but see, Tamara says the east coast of Canada, fairy lore. I mean, if you're coming in
Yeah.
from there, you're coming right down, dropping right down into Massachusetts. I mean, we have it,
There's a lot.
throughout central Canada, all the way. The indigenous people speak of fairy folklore, throughout the Canada and the U.S. And again, do you think it's like they've always been here, or do you think this is just something that comes with the Europeans, with all the immigrants?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I can speak to like the New England
Yeah,
situation a little bit. Like,
yeah,
the Puritans came here. They came here from East Anglia, and I said like there was not a lot of fairy folklore, a lot of witch folklore, devil folklore, ghost
Yeah.
folklore, but not fairy folklore.
right.
And so you see people writing, whether the Puritans or their descendants, saying, there are no fairies in New England, right? They've written this down. Like even Nathaniel Hawthorne says that in The Scarlet Letter, like there are no fairies in New England, right? They're too delicate. Like New England is too harsh, right? We have witches, we don't have fairies.
Right. The fact that they went to take the time to write that down, to
Right,
me,
exactly. Says something, right?
it's like, why?
Wow.
And so, kind of the English Puritans like, witches, we're focusing on witches, we're not going to think about fairies.
Yeah,
But again, they were ignoring that the indigenous people here had like fairy folklore or,
little people,
what we
things
would
like that.
consider fairy folklore going back for thousands of years, right? So
Right.
kind of this rich history of legends and stories about various magical creatures that live in the woods, and sort of the rules about how you would deal with them, like maybe you don't say their name outside in the summer when they're the most active, or these are the things you would leave as offerings under a tree if you want them to be on your good side, like all this lore and history that the Puritans and their descendants just weren't paying attention to, right? They were interested in conquest. They weren't interested really in learning from indigenous people here.
Yes.
And it was really in the 19th century, like Henry Longfellow, who was a poet, he wrote like Song of Hiawatha, was a big hit back in the 19th century when people read poetry. And in that, he talks about pukwudgies.
Yes.
And Song of Hiawatha is really based on like Ojibwa legends, right? Which is sort of upper Midwest, sort of more central part of the country. But Henry Longfellow lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, so he writes about pukwudgies.
Right.
Big hit. And so the word pukwudgie enters people's minds. And then some historians in Massachusetts, when they're writing their town histories, take parts of Song of Hiawatha and incorporate it into their town histories as if it was truth. So they say, oh yeah, there used to be legends about pukwudgies here in like Norton, Massachusetts, or in Easton, Massachusetts, which isn't really true. But they're using this term that's come into Massachusetts through poetry, and they're putting it into town histories. And finally, people just kind of start to use that term pukwudgie to talk about like indigenous, magical beings, indigenous fairy beings. So a woman named Elizabeth Renard, who was a folklorist in the 1920s, 1930s, she's writing a book of Cape Cod folklore, and she interviews some Wampanoag folks who live there to get some of their legends for her book, and they start to talk to her about pukwudgies. So they're using this Ojibwe word for their own indigenous kind of beliefs. And now that's kind of the term people use a lot in Massachusetts, pukwudgie.
I'd
even
want to
though
just keep saying the word
right, and
Pukwudgie.
I
I
think
just
part
think
of it is
it's
that it's a
wild.
fun. I do think that it's a fun word to say,
It is Pukwudgie.
and it's an
Sounds like a
easy
flavor of
word.
fudge.
Yeah, exactly. I'll have the
Sorry.
Yes.
Pukwudgie. We speak with respect.
Yes.
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 But
Always.
always,
It's a cute word, though.
and it's compared to the words in the Algonquin languages
Mm.
that would refer to the magical beings, it's much easier for an English speaker to say.
Yes.
So, like the words from the Algonquin languages, things like Makaya Wasug or Namawakaya Masug, like I'm
It's easier to
horribly
say
mispronouncing
Pukwudgie.
it, but it's
Yeah.
difficult to say, right?
Yes.
Versus Pukwudgie. Oh,
Yes.
like if you speak English, it's an easier word to say. So I think that's one reason it's kind of caught on. And so
Right.
now you see like you see accounts of Pukwudgies from various people, not just an indigenous thing. Like different people now will talk about encountering Pukwudgies and
Mhm.
things like that. And you
Yeah,
know,
I
it
mean,
seems
I
like
think there's stories of even missing persons when associated with Pukwudgies and fairies and little people and things
right,
like that.
right. And I think like I've read accounts of people having really bad situations with Pukwudgies. Like there's a place in southeastern Massachusetts called the Freetown State Forest. It's a big park,
Mm.
just woods, very dense, lots of pine trees and things like that. And
Mm.
supposedly Pukwudgies have been seen there. And there's an author named Christopher Balzano. He used to live in Massachusetts, now he lives in Florida, and he writes paranormal books and ghost books and things like that. So he wrote a book called Dark Woods, which is just about stories from the Freetown State Forest, because there are
Right.
that many stories from this one little area.
Wow.
And he includes some Pukwudgie stories, and they're kind of similar, the ones he tells, in that there's people encounter Pukwudgie, like there's a woman walking in the woods with her dog, like on a Saturday morning, and walking through the woods, and then the dog stops up short and the woman stops up short because sitting on a tree stump is this like small gray hairy humanoid with like a long snout, and
Wow.
maybe it has orange eyes or something like that. So it's kind of like sitting there,
Right.
and so the woman and the dog are like, woo, like this is not what we expected to see here.
No.
Not at all. And so they get out of there as fast as they can. But then the woman, who I think her name was Joan, like Joan then will see the Pukwudgie outside of her house. Like she lives on the border of the forest.
Oh,
And
followed.
so it follows her home. And she'll see it at night and things like that. And so she sees this Pukwudgie until she moves. Like she finally moves out of the area, and that's when it ends. And a similar story, like a man sees a Pukwudgie in the woods.
Mhm.
And again, it's seen outside his house. Like he goes out one night to get in his car, he turns on the headlights, and there, standing in the driveway, is the Pukwudgie he had seen a few days
So
earlier in the woods, just in his
why do you
driveway.
think?
And
Yeah,
he's like,
why do you?
whoa. And again, it continues until he moves. And that's kind of a recurring theme from
Yeah.
some stories from this era. Like you
Mhm.
encounter something, and it keeps going until you leave the area.
Wow.
Yeah, so I
Right.
don't know, like why.
Why they would follow and just keep showing up, but there's no contact made or
Right. And there's a cliff in the Freetown State Forest called the Assonet Ledge, which is a big cliff that overlooks a pond. And there are a lot of legends about it, about like ghosts and things like that. But people say that Pukwudgies will push people off that cliff.
wow.
And my husband and I went to go see it during the day, right?
Right.
And
Everything's
I love
safer
how
during
you
the day.
preface that
Yeah.
during the day.
Remember, the woman walked her dog in the forest during
this
the
is
day.
true. This is true.
Right.
And we were walking through the Freetown State Forest, and it was creepy. Like,
Yeah.
we parked in the parking lot. There weren't a lot of cars there. A lot of the trees were dead. I think there'd been like an infestation of pine borer beetles or something. So all these dead pine trees. Like, ooh. And in the distance, we can hear gunfire because there's like a shooting range nearby. Also.
Oh, wow.
Right.
So it just sets like an uneasy tone, right?
Yeah.
Like I hear gunfire, there are all these dead trees. Like, what is going to happen in these woods? And so we go to find the Assonet Ledge. We're walking. It's early March, and so the trees don't have leaves yet. And they're blowing in the wind, and they're squeaking, like as the branches like, I'm like, ooh, like this is not like a fun experience. And we don't see anybody for like at least a half hour, 45 minutes,
Right.
until we encounter a group of teenagers who are all like high out of their minds.
Wow.
Which also is not like relaxing when you're in the middle of the woods and you encounter a bunch of
Oh no! Imagine
Yeah.
their experience.
No.
Imagine their
Wow.
experience. I bet they saw everything that day.
they probably saw the Pukwudgies, right?
Yes.
And
Wow. Wow.
so finally we see the Assonet Ledge, and we're like, okay, we've had this creepy walk through the woods. We've had the unsettling encounter with like drugged up teenagers. We go to the Assonet Ledge and climb up to the top, and then we see like there's a school group having a picnic with their teacher, and people are laughing and having fun, and like all the spooky vibes just dissipate. But
Right.
if we
Right.
had been alone, or again, if like it were at night, like
Yeah.
it
Who
would be a
knows?
very
I guess
different
it's just,
experience.
yeah, what makes them choose you kind of thing, because
Yeah,
it just seems like, I mean, they obviously are very well hidden for the most part, because it's like not everybody's seeing them, or at least they're not reporting it.
right.
Right. So it seems like they're not just happening upon one per se. It almost like they're letting you see them, and then there's something about you that just makes them want to follow.
Right. It's
Like, I mean, I'm not
interesting.
so sure how I'd feel about that.
Right, you may not want it. It's
No, on some unwanted lurking.
I feel like I have an interesting story about Pukwudgies, but I do also feel like I think so much of I think a lot of it depends on your attitude and your relationship with things, right? I feel like
Right.
in the past, maybe people would have been like, oh, that's the spirit of the woods. Like, we're just going to,
And the indigenous would think the same.
yes, right. And they would know how to deal with it. And people
Yeah.
now maybe just don't know how to deal with things like this. So they tend to
Camera
think everything
phones.
is demonic, right? It's demonic.
That's
No,
really
it's true.
startling, though. You know,
It's
it's not
true.
something that you hear a lot about.
Yeah.
It's
did-
scary.
Somebody
There's
wrote
things
to
in
me,
them, their woods, as they
"There's things
say.
in those
It's
woods."
true.
I know, but I mean, this is the most we've ever spoken about Pukwudgies with any guest, and
No,
I'm
it's
just
true.
absorbing
Yeah,
it
it's not the most
all.
common thing. We have to
No.
take a really small, tiny break to
Yes.
do our station and sponsors ID.
Absolutely. You are listening to The Outer Realm with Michelle DeRoche and myself, Amelia Pisano. Tonight's special guest is Peter Muise, and we are talking all about New England folklore legends,
Found it
and
out.
traditions, and witches, and more. We are hearing live from the beautiful city of New Orleans on 105.3 FM radio, and we are streaming all over UFO, paranormal, international, public radio, you name it, we've got it. I'm not going through all 10. We're halfway through the show, so if you're listening now, it's because it's archived if you just came in. So anyways, tonight's sponsors, and from the very beginning, are the great people at Folgers Coffee, good to the last drop. Folgers, first thing in your cup. Folgers, we love you. You sponsor, and you are the reason why we are here every night, every week, Wednesday and Thursdays. Thank you from the beginning, and we hope to the very end. And also, we'd like to make mention, as I'm losing earbuds, and I'm not going to go there, I would like to make mention, of course, our incredible intro and outro is from the amazing Dr. Snick, the sonic surgeon, Justin Snicker. He is on Amazon and Bandcamp. He is an award-winning composer. It's his voice you're hearing beginning and end. Please give him, look him up and listen to his music. You can purchase it there. Also, I just want to say thank you for being here tonight. I need wine.
Frazzle.
Yeah, because I lost my earbud and I'm
You don't have
getting
to
really
tell us what's in the
annoyed.
cup. I'll just leave it right
No,
there.
I would like wine.
big
It's
cup.
tea. It's passion fruit tea. I was
Okay.
looking up because I couldn't
Okay.
remember the street of the hotel. I stay at the Kimpton 90 every time I come to Boston.
Oh,
And
nice.
I couldn't remember what the name of the street is because the cemetery, I didn't notice the cemetery till the second time I came because I was so busy walking the other way to go shopping. So
Right near
that's
the Granary
Revere's-
burying ground. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
Paul Revere's grave, and Mother Goose is there, and
Yeah.
and a lot of people from. Yeah, it's a beautiful, but that was the busiest cemetery I have ever seen.
When were you
busiest.
here? What
The
season?
that time, always May, June when
Okay.
when we come. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really busy in the summer. So many
Oh, it
tourists.
was
Like 4th of July,
crazy.
crazy.
No,
4th of
we
July is
don't
great.
come at 4th of July because it costs too much money to stay there. Just saying, that's a nice hotel. But yeah, I love that center right there. Like it just though all those hotels on that strip are all haunted.
Oh yeah, the Parker House in particular is like the one of the oldest hotels in
Yeah.
the U.S. and it's like where they invented Boston cream pie and some other things, and it supposedly has multiple ghosts in there.
Mm.
They're all over that strip on Tremont Street. They're literally as you walk by. I'm sure Sam would tell you the same thing. You just walk on that street and you're just like it's all going through you.
Oh yeah, a lot
Yeah.
of ghosts there. Yeah.
It's a beautiful, beautiful city. I'm just saying. I'm in love with Boston. Just saying. Dave Petro in case I didn't tell you yet, I love Massachusetts. Dave Petrella says, "How about the small stone chambers in the Hudson Valley at Gunwamp,
Gun-
Connecticut, and
gun-
that America's Stonehenge?"
Yeah. So if you go out into the woods in Massachusetts or New England, you may come upon a small stone chamber, right? Which is sort of just made out of the local stone. Maybe you can crawl inside. Maybe it's big enough for you to stand up. Maybe there's a bunch of them all together. And I've been to some of these. I've been to, like, one of my favorites is a place called the Upton Chamber in Upton, Massachusetts. And it's just like this enormous chamber with a huge stone slab for a ceiling. And just, these aren't made with mortar or anything like that. Someone just piled rocks on rocks and created these chambers. And so you can find them all over the area. And he mentions Gungawamp or Gungawamp, which is like down in Connecticut, which is like a whole complex of these structures, or America's Stonehenge, which is in Salem, Massachusetts. When I was a kid, it used to be called Mystery Hill, but they changed the name to America's Stonehenge. But that's another complex of like chambers, small tunnels, and things like that. And so people speculate, what are these chambers? Where do they come from? Who built them? And so I would say, again, there's like a spectrum of explanations of what they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think like historians would probably say that these are the remains of colonial era root cellars and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And this whole area used to be just farmland and things like that. So if you were to hear in the 1700s, there wouldn't really be very many forests in southern New England in particular at all. It was all farmland.
Mm-hmm.
The soil here is stony. The soil here is very acidic, so it's not great for farming.
Mm-hmm.
So as the colonists kind of moved west into places like upstate New York, Ohio, the farmers from this area moved out. And particularly once trains came in, like you didn't need to farm so much in Massachusetts because food could be brought in. And so the farms became overgrown and became woods. And if you go in the woods, you'll just find stone walls, cellar holes, things like that here, because they were all farm areas now that's been overgrown.
Mm-hmm.
So historians will say like these stone chambers are just like root cellars that people built, and now all the wooden structures are gone.
Of course, yeah.
The houses are gone, the barns are gone, but now we just have these kind of root cellars. That's what the rational kind of
archaeologists say.
Other people have other explanations.
Right.
So some people say they were made by Native Americans, like an earlier Native American group.
Mm-hmm.
Some people would say they were built by various visiting European groups, maybe who came here before the British, right? Like it was the Irish, or I've heard it was the Portuguese, or it was the Vikings,
Templars, the Vikings,
the Templars, right?
Yes.
Somebody built
yes.
them.
There was some, yeah.
And so often people can find alignments, astrological alignments, with the openings of these facing different stars or different equinoxes or things like that. So
that's interesting.
So I don't know.
Right.
Those are the explanations that people give.
Right, because of course the Hudson Valley itself has a lot of folklore and big for UFO sightings and the big for Bigfoot, and I've had so many so much information come my way through the years about the Hudson Valley. It's just been sort of like, really?
A lot of blood there too.
Yeah, well, war, right?
Yeah,
Right.
for trade.
Yeah, no. But there we go. Now, Wes has a comment.
Oh, Wes. Okay, thank you. So I just saw how long that was. So when you
Not
go,
enough wine.
no, I don't have wine. Again, passion fruit tea.
I
I'd
know.
be under the table if I had
I
wine.
know.
So when you go exploring for these different entities, do you open up your mind or ground yourself so you can give yourself a better chance of encountering them?
That's a good
Like a
question.
meditation to clear your mind.
Yeah.
Yes, Tamara, you can have mine. Her earbuds died.
Well, that's I mean, that's an interesting question. I guess why do we go visit these places? Like you guys probably go do these sort of explorations as well, right? Like when I go, I want to just see the site
Right.
and I take photos and I kind of explore it.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily go seeking to encounter anything.
Right.
As some people
I'm the
do.
same way.
I don't. I will say the one time, there maybe been a couple times, but one time we went to a place called the Ramtail Mill Complex, which is down in Foster, Rhode Island, which is kind of the woodsy
Oh,
part of Rhode
wow.
Island west of Providence.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's a mill complex that was built in like the late 1700s and was kind of abandoned in the early 1800s, supposedly because the manager of the mill killed himself and his ghost haunts the mill, right? So it was this thriving little mill complex by a river, and like every morning, the manager, this guy named Peleg Walker, would ring the bell to summon people to work from the village. And so at a certain point, he argues with the owner of the mill. And why he argued is not quite clear. Some people say it's because he was in love with the mill owner's daughter and wanted to marry her. And the mill owner's like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. Like, you are not going to marry my daughter. And so they have this fight, and Peleg Walker kind of rushes off. But the next morning, people hear the bell ringing to summon them to the mill. So they all kind of come from their houses to go into the mill. And there they see Peleg Walker hanging from a rope, which is attached to the bell. And that's why the bell is ringing, because his body is swaying back and forth.
Wow.
So the people who work there are, of course, freaked out. And the owner of the mill cuts down the body and says, Peleg Walker was, not right in his head. Everyone get back to work.
Right.
So everyone works that day. They go home. The next morning, they hear the bell ringing. They all go to the mill. They see the rope is moving on its own, and the bell is ringing on its own. And the mill owner's like, oh, it's just the wind. It's just the wind making this bell ring. And then he just cuts down the rope entirely, so there's no rope. Next morning, people hear the bell ring again. They go in. The bell is just ringing on its own, like there's no rope. Like, how is this bell ringing? And that's when people realize, wait a second.
Yeah.
This mill is being haunted. And so people then will see Peleg Walker's ghost wandering through the mill at night carrying a lantern, like doing his nightly rounds. And people leave. Like, the workers don't want to work. They're as haunted.
Sure.
The machinery starts to malfunction. Like, the
That's
wheel
scary.
will go backwards. Like, there's a wheel that the river turns. That wheel will start to go against the current.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole village becomes abandoned. And you can go see this area. It's out in the woods now in Foster, Rhode Island. And you can go and walk through this area. And there's a road, there are walls, there are big cellar holes. And it was a decent sized area, completely abandoned now. And so I went with my husband and we were wandering around. We saw only 2 other people in the whole area for maybe like an hour or more.
Mm-hmm.
And it was spooky. Like, gave me spooky vibes, right? Which is I don't always get. I got the spooky
That's pretty good for
vibes.
somebody who doesn't really believe it. You got
Yes,
the
right?
vibes. The vibes.
Got the
I like
vibes.
that.
And it wasn't nighttime, right?
No, it was the day. It was like a sunny day.
Wow. So
Yeah.
And I remember I was taking photos with my iPhone, and some of them came out totally white. Which how does that happen on the iPhone? I don't know. But I was taking photos of some walls and things like that, and they came out just completely white on my phone. I was like, it had never happened before.
Something was
Yeah.
standing in front of it, Peter.
Maybe so. So I was like, okay, this is a spooky experience.
Yeah,
But we
something was
didn't
standing
go.
in front of it.
I didn't go in like intending to encounter a ghost or anything like that. So that's probably
Right.
my
I
big
love that.
paranormal encounter, if that's what it
But then
was.
you have genuine experiences. I never go in there just because I'm a medium. I don't go in there looking for I when I'm in like when I said I love Boston, Massachusetts, it's because I want to absorb the history. It has nothing to do with things
Mm.
just happen,
Right.
because it is a very haunted state, but it's not I don't look for it. I really do enjoy it there.
Hmm. I find the East Coast of the US really active because I think
Huge.
it's where many of the settlers came in from, the whole eastern coast, right? Coming in from Europe and
Yeah.
coming in through Massachusetts and making their way, even like Pennsylvania, I find is the same. It's really crazy. But then again, that tends to be the birth of government, right?
Right. And
So
just older, like for the US, like these are the older
yeah,
parts of the
yeah,
country. And
yeah.
if you think about the Puritans, they came here in the early 1600s. They could have, I often say, like they could have seen Shakespeare's plays performed live on stage the first time.
Oh yeah,
Like,
oh
oh yeah, I
yeah,
just saw this play called The Tempest, and I'm going to go sail over to Massachusetts and
yeah.
hang some
Oh my
hatchets or whatever.
gosh. Can you
So it's a different
imagine?
worldview, right? That's a different mindset. Like that's the Renaissance. That is not
Maybe
the
maybe
Enlightenment.
they know who Shakespeare really was.
I find it interesting. They were an interesting group of people because they came here with. I mean, they were really hardcore to come here from Europe, as a lot of them were older and really staunch. That's a big move to
It's a big
come to a
move.
new world and to start. It's something you would expect of a young man and a young woman, like, braving it, knowing that it's going to be hard work. But to have so many of these, I guess, not so much elite, but I mean, they came here obviously running, governments and running their towns and having authority, so they would have had to have come from that to a degree,
Right.
right? A lot of
Right.
like older generation people coming in to brave a new world without knowing what to expect.
I know. It's interesting. I mean, they were conquerors and they massacred the Native Americans. So I mean, lots of bad things, right? Hanged
Yeah,
witches,
of
sold slaves,
course.
all of that.
Of course.
But it's interesting, like, they came and they founded Harvard College and they had built a printing press and they
Yeah.
were interested in literacy. And
Mm.
although I think their attitude towards women was terrible compared to where we are at now, I think they
Right.
were also more liberal than some other people at the time. Like,
Hard to
women,
believe
hard to
because they
believe.
were so not liberal. Like,
Right. Yeah.
I mean, the atrocities that they were responsible for, that forged literally in stone the history. Like,
Yeah.
even though, I mean, witch trials were all over Europe, you don't hear about them as much as, if you say to anybody, for the most part, witches, Salem.
Right. Which
Right
is
away.
interesting. Even
Right away.
people from
Yeah.
England or things like, oh, Salem witch trials. I'm like, there were so many witch trials in England. Why but
Yeah.
I think it's also television with Salem too, because whenever anything paranormal show or anything is done in the US,
Hmm.
it always references Salem. So with television nowadays, it's a big deal.
Hmm.
Tamara, the Puritans were dealing with harassment for their religious views. That's why they came to the US. That and the plagues as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
they were
Yeah.
like the English Civil War was Puritans versus Parliament, Puritans versus the Royals.
Yes.
So a lot of them came over here to kind of avoid that civil war, and so there was a
Hmm.
lot happening.
Talk about
Right.
liberal, the royals.
Yeah.
They were
I'll leave that right there.
we'll leave it there. That's a whole other program.
Yep.
Start at
So,
the Tudors and you could go for years.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think like some people say, like, is New England or Massachusetts weirder than other areas of the U.S.?
mm,
And I often think of like, the three most important horror writers came from this area. So like Edgar Allan Poe was born in
Yes.
Boston, grew up here, and then finally left because it was too uptight. So like you couldn't take how uptight Boston was. So he
Well,
left.
he was a little pissed off
Oh,
with his
Edgar.
last book.
Yeah.
So
He
he
was a little
left.
pissed off.
So you have him. Then you have H.P. Lovecraft, who grew up in Rhode Island, right? And he's a weird and kind of problematic person, I think, as a person, right? He was a racist, but influential as a horror writer.
Right.
So he's from Rhode Island. And then Stephen King grew up in Maine and still
Maine.
lives in Maine.
Right.
Yes.
And so like it's this really small part of the country, but how come it generated these three
Horror.
right
Oh.
super influential horror writers? Like these are
Yes.
the most influential horror
Of all
writers. Like, how
things.
did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, they could have been writing about anything,
Right.
but they end up being very influential in horror.
Right. So is it something about this area that the
Experiences.
history, the experiences,
Yeah.
the landscape, I don't know, something they're like, oh,
I don't know.
Right.
Massachusetts is magical.
I just find the Eastern Coast, spent a little bit of time in Connecticut, and I'm just like,
Connecticut's beautiful.
It is beautiful, and it is active, and there's a lot of interesting things in Connecticut, but that's another show. So Witches and Warlocks is the newest book.
Yes.
Where do you go from here? What are you going to tackle next? I mean, tell us, rhyme off all your books, and if
Sure.
this is the time of the show where you
best like I have a blog. I've been blogging for 13 years. That's a long time to write a blog.
I put up on our group page.
Yep. So New England Folklore is the name of the blog. newenglandfolklore.blogspot.com. So that's if you want to reach me or read my stuff, you can find a lot of it there. My first book was Legends and Lore of the North Shore. So it's legends and lore from the North Shore of Massachusetts. That was 2014, I think that was. And then my current book, Witches and Warlocks of Massachusetts. Wait, hold it up. See if I can get rid of that.
Yeah,
there it is.
the
Witches
cover.
and Warlocks of Massachusetts.
That would be a good one. Everybody.
Just came out September 1st. So you can get that.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah,
it's a lot of fun to write. Those are my two books, and I've written things that have appeared in other places, including a book called Magical Folk, British and Irish Fairies, and
very interesting.
Various different people contributed to that one. I contributed a chapter on New England fairy folklore for that one. So
very nice.
And other things for that.
Congratulations.
Right. Fantastic. Yeah.
So those are some things I've written.
No. So what do you do next? Like, what are you going to tackle next for your research out there?
I'm thinking monsters, maybe. Like I've done witches. Maybe I'll do monsters.
Monsters.
Just there's a lot of monster stories out there. So everything from, big hairy humanoids, whether you call them wild men, you call them Sasquatch, you call them Bigfoot. So those sorts of stories.
Almost cryptozoology sort of.
Yeah.
Tamara's, yes, monsters, Peter.
Mermaid stories.
They have mermaid stories in Massachusetts.
Mermaids.
Tackle that book. I definitely would love to have you come back.
And of course, demon stories, all that sort of stuff. UFO encounters. And just random, like, I don't know what this is, monsters. Like, oh, someone sees a humanoid with a lizard head in the woods, or those random.
You don't even know how to categorize that one.
Right, like miscellaneous, right?
Yeah, it's a miscellaneous monster. We don't really know what it is. So, but those are the best ones because then the people get to say, you know what, I saw something like that, or it come up with their own interpretation, which is really awesome. Goatman, yes, he actually spoke about Goatman. Yeah.
Goatman,
yeah. That's when West.
Oh yeah, no kidding.
He's never going to.
The kidding comment. Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
I never know exactly when somebody's chiming in. Hard to keep up. So, well, you know what? I think you live in a great place to be able to come up with that, because I know our East Coast is just teeming with stuff, and people just hop right over, down to Maine, Massachusetts, and from like Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, up that whole area, and there's a lot of similar folklore.
There is, and it's just like I have living here, I have like almost 400 years of folklore and legends to draw on, which is great.
Yeah.
So I can look at, Governor John Winthrop's diary, or I can look at something that was just posted on the Bigfoot Research Organization last week or something. And how do those things compare and contrast, and how are they similar? How are they different? So,
but I like how you can trace some of that, like your witch research, witches, warlocks, how you can actually trace some of that to England.
Right.
You find the source for it, which sometimes you just don't. Sometimes there's just something there. It's just a story,
right.
But you're dealing with these people, and it's like they have a full history over there of doing exactly the same thing there that they did in Massachusetts and Salem.
Right. It's always fun to find out like the oldest account or the first story about something. Or where did the witch beliefs come from? Oh, they came from England.
Yes. Oh yeah, it's just like old habits die hard, I suppose. The mindset is just sometimes so strong that you can't scrub it. It just becomes like the fiber, Okay, here's a comment for you.
Yeah, Wes, very interesting man. Peter, look forward to reading one of your books.
Thank you, Wes.
Excellent.
Thank you, Wes.
Okay, so we've got your blog, and we is there anything else, like how else can people reach out to you as we come to the end of the show?
I think if you go to my blog, my email address is on there.
So, okay.
Oh, great.
And sometimes it takes me time to respond, but I will respond to your email in time.
Okay. And people can follow you, I know, on Instagram.
On Facebook and Facebook too. Yeah, Facebook is blog and Facebook are probably the best, I think.
Perfect. Well, thank you for coming on. It was a lot of fun, wealth of information. I love hearing the stories, and I look forward to hearing and seeing more from you. Great. And I hope we can do this again.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for all of so much information. It was so much fun.
It does.
Oh, I want to buy your book now.
Please
there
do.
We go.
The Warlocks. I actually have Amazon waiting. I just want you at a bonfire. Is that okay? Would your husband be okay with that? I just want to steal you for a few hours.
As long as it's not too spooky, right? Nothing too spooky.
Yeah. No. I just want to hear. I want to listen to you. I could listen to you for hours and hours. You're so amazing. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Very kind. Thank you.
Here we go. Here's one. Thank you.
Oh, Liz. Yes.
Oh, great.
From Scotland.
Wow.
Thank you for tuning in. It's late for you, Liz.
Tuning in, Liz. Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. That's so kind of you. Why are you awake?
I know. It's like 4 a.m. over there right now.
Time for breakfast. It's time for
You're
breakfast.
Champion, Liz. Thank you. Wow.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Peter, thank you very much. And I will be in touch, and we will send you a link to the archives.
Great. Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you.
All right. Good night now.
Good night.
Good night.
Okay, so we have come to the end of another amazing segment already, the first segment of 2022, and we have delivered just as promised, and honestly, it's going to be a really amazing year, I promise, because here we are with Peter Muise, which was just fascinating, and who knew? I mean, there's so much more to Massachusetts than the trials. That in itself is just rich in history and hauntings and so on. But we want to have a big thank you to everybody who is in chat tonight. Chat rooms were on fire. Thank you. Big thank you to Peter for being just amazing. And huge thank you to Folgers Coffee, who has sponsored us from day one. You've been a part of our journey, and we hope to keep forging ahead with you. So thank you. Also, Dr. Snick, aka Justin Snicker, for the intro and the outro. So please remember to head on over to YouTube, UFO Paranormal Radio, and to International Public Radio and UFO Gods and Extraterrestrials, and subscribe if you haven't. Don't forget about little old us on Facebook, The Outer Realm. Give us a like. We would appreciate it. If you'd like to communicate with us, please only on the Outer Realm contact@gmail.com. That's the Outer Realm contact@gmail.com. And that's if you want to be on the show, if you want to have someone on the show, certain topic. I know we've had a few topics thrown at us, and I promise you we are delivering. So you're just going to have to wait as we move along. You'll know who you are once they're up and running. So please tune in tomorrow night as we welcome for the very first time yet again, Les Velez. And he's going to be discussing opus. He'll tell you what that is. That's OPUS. He'll be talking about alien contact, hybrids. He's got a pretty good resume of stuff that we're going to discuss. So until then, everybody, thank you for tuning in again, and we shall see you tomorrow night. Behave a little bit. Thank you.